In the digital age, where we are constantly connected, few things are more unsettling than a mysterious phone call from an unknown number. The familiar ring that usually links us to friends and family can sometimes become a gateway to the unexplained. Imagine a scenario where for the last 2 days you have been receiving phone calls from an unknown number. At first, you decide to ignore the calls. However, the calls still persist. So you gather up your courage and finally pick up. But all you hear on the other end is silence with occasional rustling sounds in the background. And after around 30 seconds, the caller hangs up. You don't think of it much at first, but in the upcoming days, you keep receiving these same silent phone calls, until one day, the silence finally gets broken by the following music. After exactly 1 minute, the strange melody abruptly stops, and the phone call ends. The eerie music lingers in your mind long after the call ends, and you find yourself hoping the mysterious phone calls will stop for good. However, just after a few days, you witness the same caller ID on your phone screen, and while hesitant at first, the curiosity ultimately takes you over, and you decide to pick up the phone once again. You expect to hear silence. However, what comes out from the other end turns out to be far more unsettling than that. This exact story happened to a friend of a Redditor going by the username DonkeyKongIsMyGuy46, who posted the original story on a subreddit RBI and asked the community to help find out what could be the origin of these creepy phone calls that have been haunting him and his friend. In the post, the OP immediately identified that the mysterious music that was played during the phone call was actually a melody from a number station, but was still inclined to figure out if someone else has received similar phone calls and whether anyone could identify the source of the second call. In the comments, multiple people shared what they think might be the truth behind these strange calls. The majority of commenters believed that what the author and his friend experienced were just simple and innocent prank calls from somebody they might know, or that perhaps it were some teenagers calling around random numbers in order to creep people out. However, some of the responses to the post suggested that the calls were possibly malicious and actually came from scammers as part of a deliberate plan. As someone on a different post mentioned, stop answering your phone. They call to see whether you will pick up consistently, and they sell your phone number to scammers because you're gonna answer the call. The more you answer and converse, the more they get from your number, because you're more likely to engage scammers. Had to tell my parents the same thing recently. Mom got a grandparents scam call, and that led to her telling me about the frequent calls. Stop answering unrecognized calls. Even though both theories of the mysterious phone calls could be true, the actual origin of them is still left a mystery. In 1993, Gary Sudbrink was planning a surprise trip to New York to visit friends and family. Before boarding his plane, a peculiar encounter unfolded. A well-dressed man with a clipboard approached him, asking oddly personal questions about his name and the destination that he's traveling to. Sudbrink assumed that the man was just a persistent salesman and ignored the questions while walking to his gate. The strangeness, however, didn't end there. Once seated on the plane, a different man sat beside Gary and began asking similar invasive questions. Annoyed, he called over a flight attendant who discovered that this man was not even in his assigned seat. The intruder was forced to move, first to a seat behind Gary, where he continued his harassment, and then elsewhere on the plane after further complaints. Upon landing, Gary called his friend to announce his surprise visit. To his shock, however, his friend claimed that Gary had already called about the visit the previous day, a call which Gary had actually never made. Although confused and unsettled, Gary decided to brush it all off and go about his visit. Unfortunately, the situation quickly escalated from strange to terrifying, as the same night, Gary received 3 consecutive calls from an unknown number, followed by a 4th call the following day.
Yes. I'll tell you who it is.
Hello?
Yeah. Do you want to speak to him?
It's Gary's Sudbrink there.
Yeah, who's this? Steven? Are you playing games with me or what? Huh? Steven, if you're playing games, I'm going to kick your ass.
So how long are you going to be back from Texas?
Huh?
You're being impersonated by the other voice.
Yeah, this is you, Steven, you idiot. You're pissing me off. Jerk. I'm going to get you on... Let's see what it says. Review. 1 new call out of area. Is Steven out of the area?
How long are you going to be back from Texas?
Wait, say that again?
You're being impersonated by the other voice.
Wait, hold on. Is Steven out of the calling area or what?
How do I know?
What do you mean you don't know? He's in Queens. Who are you talking? I don't know who the fuck.
Hello?
Hello?
It's Gary's Sudbrink there.
In the first call, we hear Gary attempting to identify the mysterious caller, initially thinking it might be his friend, Steven. The caller, however, completely ignores Gary's questions. Instead, this voice asks the same personal questions as the men from earlier that day, including,
So how long are you going to be back from Texas?
and directly asking,
It's Gary's Sudbrink there.
as if the caller didn't know they were actually speaking to him. Though the most disturbing message was when the caller warned Gary that he was being impersonated by the other voice.
You're being impersonated by the other voice.
The other 3 calls that were made afterwards featured the same robotic voice.
Yes, this is me. Can I speak to you? Can I ask why you're... Yes, can I ask why you're calling? Can I please ask... Yes, this is. Yes, that is me. Say that again?
This planet.
Leave?
We come
I'm staying right here.
to be within this planet.
Is this a joke or what?
The many to be contacted. As the
Um,
Gary never provided any follow-up information about these incidents, leaving many questions unanswered. Who or what was on the other end of these calls, and what did they want? There are several theories out there that try to uncover the truth behind these disturbing phone calls. One of the most popular ones suggests that these could have been attempts by extraterrestrial beings to communicate and perhaps even warn humanity. This theory gained traction due to statements in the fourth call, where the voice claimed,
To be within this planet.
and
To many. To be contacted. As the same with you.
Additionally, many observers also noted the striking resemblance between the two mysterious men Gary encountered and the infamous Men in Black. These mysterious men in dark suits are known to appear after UFO sightings or paranormal events, often questioning witnesses and attempting to suppress information. In this case, the man with a clipboard and the persistent passenger, both described as well-dressed, definitely fit the profile, appearing suddenly, asking invasive questions, and then vanishing with no explanation. However, while the alien contact theory is certainly fascinating, there is a more plausible explanation. The entire story and recordings were simply fabricated. Some people noticed that once the phone calls are sped up twice the normal speed, the robotic voice starts bearing a striking resemblance to Gary's own voice and accent. Considering the technological limitations of 1993, it's likely that Gary recorded his own voice on a tape and then played it back at a slower speed through another device to create the eerie and distorted robotic effect that you hear in the alleged phone calls. Interestingly, if you visit Gary's personal YouTube channel today, you'll find no mention of the incident, only comedic UFO-themed videos, which further increase the suspicion that the entire story could have been a hoax or a prank about aliens. However, the voice sounding like Gary himself does not necessarily debunk the phone calls from being real, as it was mentioned that Gary's friend had actually received a call from someone imitating him, and one of the mysterious calls also included a warning about something impersonating Gary's voice. With no further updates, the Sudbrink calls remain a chilling mystery, leaving us to wonder what could have really happened during those strange days in 1993. In the summer of 1981, a quiet night shift at the St. Paul, Minnesota Police Department was interrupted by a phone call unlike any other they had received before. The dispatcher who answered had no idea she was about to hear something that would haunt her for years to come.
You find me? I just stabbed somebody with an ice pick. I can't stop myself. I keep killing somebody. Don't talk, just listen. I'm sorry what I did to Compton. I couldn't help it. Don't know why I had to stab her. I am so upset about it. I keep getting drunk every night. I can't believe it. It's just like a big dream. I can't think of being locked up. If I get locked up, I'll kill myself. I'd rather kill myself than get locked up. I'll try not to kill anybody else.
From the audio of the call, you can hear how a seemingly distressed man is remorsefully crying and confessing to murdering a young woman with an ice pick. This memorable voice belonged to Paul Michael Stefani, who called 911 after brutally taking the life of Kimberly Compton, an 18-year-old from Wisconsin who traveled to St. Paul on June 3, 1981, seeking employment and a fresh start. On her very first day in the Twin Cities, she encountered Stefani, a meeting that would later prove to be fatal. 3 boys later discovered her body near a freeway construction site in St. Paul, bearing 61 stab wounds from an ice pick. This, however, wasn't Paul's first crime. 6 months earlier, on December 31st, 1980, Stefani had called 911 at approximately 3 a.m. to report a woman severely injured near a St. Paul manufacturing plant.
Yes, please, this is an emergency. Please send a squad to Pierce Butler Road, Molenberg Manufacturing Company, machine shop. Please, there's an ambulance too. There's a girl hurt there.
Can you tell me what happened to her?
Just hurry, she's laying on the ground in the back by the railroad tracks, by the edge here. Hurry.
What's the address?
I don't know.
Who are you?
The victim, Karen Potak, survived the brutal beating but couldn't recall details about her attacker. Unlike his later calls, Stefani took no ownership of this assault at the time. After almost 2 years, on July 1st, 1982, the body of 33-year-old Kathleen Greening was discovered in the bathtub of her suburban Minnesota home. The police did not receive any anonymous call following this murder. The deviation from Stefani's pattern helped him to avoid suspicion in this case. However, just over a month later, on August 6, 1982, Barbara Simmons, a 40-year-old nurse, walked into a Minneapolis bar where she met Stefani. After leaving with him, she was found dead the next day with multiple stab wounds. Following his previous pattern, Stefani called authorities right after.
Fire emergency.
Please don't talk, just listen. I'm sorry I killed that girl. I stabbed her 40 times. Kimberly Compton was the first one over at St. Paul. I don't know what's the matter with me. I'm sick. I'm going to kill myself, I think.
Where are you?
I'm just going to... If somebody dies with a red shirt on, it's me. I killed both of you. I'm sorry. I'll never make it to heaven.
By this time, investigators had connected the distinctive beeping voice from multiple calls, naming the unknown predator the Weepy-voiced killer. They even publicly stated they had a suspect in the Compton murder and Potak assault, though they didn't yet have a name. Stefani's crimes culminated on August 21st, 1982, when he picked up 19-year-old Denise Williams, a sex worker, from Hennepin Avenue in Minneapolis. After offering her $100, he drove her to his St. Paul apartment. When they left, Williams expected to be returned to Hennepin Avenue, but Stefani had a different plan in mind. He stopped on a dead-end road and attacked her with a screwdriver, stabbing her multiple times in the stomach. In a decisive moment, Williams fought back using a bottle that she found laying on the floor mat. During the struggle, both fell out of the passenger side door onto the street. A passerby witnessed the attack and attempted to intervene, causing Stefani to flee. His injuries from the confrontation were severe enough that he called 911, requiring an ambulance. On the other end of the call, dispatchers immediately recognized his distinctive voice, causing Stefani to be later arrested and charged with the attempted murder of Williams, and subsequently identified as Simmons' killer by witnesses who had seen them leave the bar together. He was convicted and sentenced to more than 40 years in prison, finally bringing his brutal crimes and the creepy 911 calls to an end. It wasn't until 1997, when diagnosed with skin cancer, that Stefani confessed to all of his crimes, the murders of Compton, Greening, and Simmons, as well as the assault on Potak. He later died in prison in 1998, finally bringing closure to a case that had terrified the Twin Cities for years. In early 1980, life took a terrifying turn for Dorothy Jane Scott, a 32-year-old single mother from Stanton, California, when she began receiving disturbing phone calls from an unidentified man whose voice seemed oddly familiar, yet she couldn't quite place her finger on it. One thing for certain was the caller's wildly unpredictable behavior. One moment, he'd declare his undying love for her. The next, he'd threaten her life with chilling statements, like telling her,
When I get you alone, I will cut you up into bits so no one will ever find you.
However, what made these calls truly horrifying wasn't just the threats. It was the caller's intimate knowledge of Dorothy's daily life. He was able to consistently describe the clothing she was wearing that day, or mention places she had visited recently, making it painfully clear he was watching her every move. In one particularly disturbing incident, the stalker told Dorothy to go outside because he had something for her. Although hesitant, Dorothy complied with the request and stepped out. When she nervously approached her car, she discovered a single dead rose placed on her windshield, showcasing just how close he could get to her at any given moment. Despite the terrifying threats, Dorothy tried her best to continue her day-to-day life as usual. That was, at least, until May 28, 1980, which initially began as an ordinary Wednesday for Dorothy. She woke up, dropped off her son at her parents' house, and went to attend a staff meeting at work. However, during the meeting, she noticed one of her co-workers, Conrad Bostron, looking seriously ill. Without much hesitation, Dorothy offered to drive Conrad to the hospital, with another colleague, Pam Head, joining them. On their way, Dorothy briefly stopped at her parents' house to check on her son, during which time she also switched her black scarf to her red one, a small detail that would later become crucially important. Once they arrived at the UC Irvine Medical Center, doctors determined Bostron had been bitten by a black widow spider and began treatment, while Dorothy and her colleagues stayed waiting. Throughout this entire hospital visit, Pam Head would later insist that Dorothy never left her side, nor made any phone calls. At around 11 p.m., when Conrad was finally treated and ready to leave, Dorothy told her coworkers she would bring her white Toyota station wagon closer to the hospital exit while they waited inside to fill a prescription. However, minutes passed and Dorothy was yet to return. Pam and Conrad then decided to walk out to the parking lot and look around. Unexpectedly, they saw Dorothy's car speeding away. Initially, they thought an emergency with her son was the reason behind Dorothy's sudden departure. But when hours passed with no word from her, they grew increasingly worried. By early morning, they still hadn't received a single response, and thus reported her missing. Just a couple hours later, at approximately 4:30 a.m., Dorothy's car was discovered abandoned and set ablaze in an alley in Santa Ana. Dorothy's family was left in shock after the incident. However, the actual nightmare for them was just about to begin. About a week after her disappearance, her mother Vera received the first in what would become a years-long series of tormenting calls. The male voice simply asked,
Are you related to Dorothy Scott?
When Vera confirmed she was, the caller chillingly stated,
I've got her.
Before quickly hanging up. After this phone call took place, the police installed voice recording equipment in Scott's family home. However, they were not able to trace these calls back. The perpetrator never stayed on the line long enough to be tracked, a chilling sign that he clearly understood how to avoid being traced. These horrifying calls continued regularly, sometimes even weekly, with the caller either breathing heavily into the phone or making brief, taunting remarks about Dorothy and how he has her. As time went by, Dorothy's family grew more and more desperate for answers. With the goal to bring more attention to the story and encourage the search process, Dorothy's father approached the Santa Ana newspaper to run a story about his missing daughter. On June 12, 1980, the same day that the article was published, the paper's editor, Pat Riley, received an anonymous call from a man claiming to be the one behind Dorothy's disappearance. She was my love. the caller declared, after which he made a chilling confession. "I caught her cheating with another man. She denied having someone else. I killed her." To further prove his connection to the case, the caller mentioned details that hadn't been published, including Dorothy's red scarf and the fact that her coworker had been treated for a spider bite. He also claimed Dorothy had called him from the hospital that night, though Pam had insisted that Dorothy never made any calls during their time there. Furthermore, according to everyone in Dorothy's life, she had no serious boyfriends at the time of her disappearance, making the caller's possessive claims all the more disturbing. The case remained in limbo for over 4 years, until August 6, 1984, when several construction workers made a grim discovery near Santa Ana Canyon Road. They stumbled upon charred human remains alongside dog bones, both severely burned, likely from a bushfire that swept through the area in 1982. Though no specific cause of death could be determined due to the condition of the remains, authorities identified them as Dorothy's through dental records. Strangely, the tormenting calls to the Scott family had actually stopped in April of that same year, just after a few months before the discovery of the remains. However, after the public announcement of the discovery, the calls briefly resumed, with one final call where the mysterious caller asked the family if they had found her, before hanging up for the last time. Despite the clues collected, such as the killer's taunting calls spanning for over 4 years, and the eventual discovery of Dorothy's remains, her case still remains unsolved to this day. Police were convinced that the caller was more than likely her killer, but since they failed to trace back his location or find any different kinds of evidence, Dorothy Jane Scott's murderer continues to escape justice up until today, leaving her family and the local community with unanswered questions about who could be as cruel as to stalk, abduct, and kill this young mother while psychologically tormenting her family for years to come. The case stands as one of Southern California's most disturbing unsolved mysteries.